Thorne sat cross-legged in the hangar, dragging a whetstone slowly across a blade that looked stolen from a museum vault. Around him, cadets polished phase lances and calibrated drone-linked rifles, their laughter bouncing against the steel walls. "Relic work," one of the crystalline luminaries sneered. "Primitive steel can't stand against ion mesh." Jarek didn't glance up. His hand was steady, his voice quieter than the hum of engines. "It's never failed me." A ripple of amusement moved through the crowd, until Rin Calder caught the flicker in Yarek's eyes. Calm, cold, as if he'd already fought battles none of them had survived. Jarek Thorne sat alone in the training hangar, the clang of distant drills echoing off the steel walls. Around him, cadets from half a dozen worlds checked their gleaming gear, phase lances humming with ion charge, Gauss rifles linked to drones, armor that shimmered with reactive mesh. And yet Yarek's hands worked over something that looked like it belonged in a museum display, a jagged relic of carbon steel, its edge glinting faintly as he drew a whetstone down its length. The sound was soft, scraping, steady. A ritual. He could feel the stares before he heard the laughter. The crystalline cadet from the luminary leaned against a column, voice sharp and amused. "Primitive steel? You humans never outgrow your toys, do you?" The remark rippled through the group, more chuckles rising, some sneers hidden behind polished visors. To them, Yarek wasn't just odd. He was beneath notice, a relic clinging to a dead tradition. Rin Calder shifted uneasily nearby, his gaze flicking from the mocking crowd back to Yarek. "Ignore them," Rin muttered under his breath. But Yarek didn't look up, didn't respond. His strokes remained even, precise. He had done this 1,000 times before. A Draxine cadet, bulkier than the rest, stepped closer, his voice carrying over the hum of the hangar. "Steel cracks, steel bends. Against ion mesh, you'll be cut down before you even lift it." His tone was half warning, half challenge, and the group quieted, waiting to see if Yarek would finally defend himself. At last he raised his eyes, calm, unshaken. His reply came soft, almost casual. "It's never failed me." The words dropped like stone into water, silencing the chamber for a breath. Some laughed again, nervous, dismissive, but not all. Rin caught the flicker in Yarek's gaze, something colder than pride, sharper than arrogance. It wasn't a boast, it was a memory. And for the first time, a question edged into the room, unspoken but heavy. How could a cadet speak like that? As if he had already stood where the rest of them had never dared. The hangar lights dimmed without warning. A low siren rumbled through the array, so deep it rattled the floor. At once, cadets froze mid-drill, visors snapping down, rifles primed. Then the overhead speakers boomed with a calm mechanical tone. "Emergency simulation commencing. All personnel to designated response stations." The crowd relaxed. Laughter rose again as some clapped each other on the back. "Another drill," someone muttered. "They never stop testing us." Armor locked into place, weapons lit with neon edge, and the cadets surged toward their assigned corridors. But Yarek didn't move. His eyes narrowed, fixed on the lights along the bulkhead. They pulsed in the wrong sequence, off rhythm by less than a second, but enough to jar his gut. The voice in the speakers carried no faint harmonic echo of Mother Glass, the Sentinel AI, and the siren. The siren was half a note lower than regulation. "It isn't a drill," he said quietly. Rin halted mid-stride, confusion on his face. "What are you talking about?" Yarek rose smoothly, sheathing the blade at his side. His voice was calm, but his tone left no room for argument. "This is live." The other cadets burst out laughing, even louder now. "The relic thinks he's an expert," one jeered. "Next he'll tell us the walls are about to fall in." Jarek didn't answer. He simply turned away from the rushing crowd and started toward the maintenance passage at the hangar's edge. Rin hesitated, then swore under his breath and followed. They were 10 steps in when the floor shook. A roar thundered down the corridor, the sound of metal shearing, of atmosphere venting. The lights snapped red. Cadets screamed as the far blast doors exploded inward. a bloom of fire swallowing half the passage. The simulation was gone. Yarek's blade was in his hand before the smoke cleared, eyes locked on the breach. His jaw clenched as he whispered just loud enough for Rin to hear. "They're here!" Smoke choked the air. The corridor filled with shrieks and scrambling boots as cadets scattered toward their designated routes. But Yarek veered in the opposite direction, pushing through a sealed hatch marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Rin grabbed his arm. "That's restricted." Yarek keyed a sequence into the manual override, his fingers moving with practiced certainty. The lock disengaged with a hiss. "So are the invaders," he replied, stepping inside. The narrow service shaft beyond was claustrophobic. Bare pipes, exposed wiring, and shadows that swallowed every footstep. Rin followed reluctantly, the sound of gunfire already echoing in the distance. "How did you even know that code?" Rin asked, voice low. "Same way I know where they'll breach next," Yarek answered. He didn't look back. They moved swiftly, Yarek pausing at each junction, counting wires, tracing conduits like he'd walked this path 100 times. He stopped at a grated vent, crouched and pointed. Through the mesh, enemy soldiers marched in tight formation, black armor gleaming, weapons raised, movements too precise to be any simulation. Jarek's grip tightened on the blade. Rin stared. "There's a dozen of them. We can't—" Yarek held up a hand, silencing him. He whispered a string of numbers. "Protocol 717. They'll take the Eastern Passage because that's what the manual dictates." But the manual's wrong. And as if on cue, the soldiers split at the junction, half peeling exactly where Yarek predicted. Rin blinked. "How?" But the question died in his throat. Yarek dropped silently through the vent, hitting the floor behind the rearmost soldier. One clean arc of steel. Armor split, a body fell without sound. The others marched on, unaware. Yarek dragged the corpse into the shadows, his movements terrifyingly efficient. Above, Rin's heart pounded. He wasn't looking at a cadet anymore. He was looking at someone who had done this before. The enemy's boots struck the deck in steady rhythm, a drumbeat of precision. Yarek moved with a rhythm of his own, quieter, sharper, every step measured. He crouched behind a coolant pipe, the relic blade angled low. The second soldier passed within arm's reach. In the space of a breath, Yarek lunged. Steel slid into the gap beneath the shoulder plate, slipping between armor and flesh. The soldier stiffened, tried to shout, too late. Yarek clamped a hand over the visor, dragged him down and finished it with a twist. Silent. Efficient. Rin dropped from the vent, eyes wide. "You—" His words died as Yarek pressed a finger to his lips. The rest of the squad marched on, unaware. Yarek knelt, pulling a small module from the corpse's belt, an encrypted tactical node. He turned it over in his palm, studying the flickering display. His jaw tightened. "Standard doctrine. They're running corridor sweep gamma." Rin frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means they'll clear left, ignore the right, and circle back in 2 minutes," Yarek said. His voice was low, clinical. He spoke like he'd seen it before, like he'd fought against it before. Rin swallowed. "You shouldn't know that." Yarek slid the blood-slick blade back into its sheath. "Neither should they be here." The next soldier rounded the corner. Yarek moved before the cadet could raise his rifle. The blade slashed across the joint of the knee, toppling him. Before the body hit the ground, Yarek severed the throat joint. 2 strikes. Over in seconds. The squad's formation faltered, just long enough for panic to ripple. Their armor, designed to withstand plasma fire, had no defense against a blade driven with absolute precision into its seams. Rin stared, stunned, as the third soldier fell, arterial spray catching the dim red lights. It wasn't the weapon that frightened him. It was Yarek, the calm, the certainty, the way his eyes never wavered. Yarek wiped the blade clean on a fallen banner, his voice cold. "Doctrine makes them predictable. Predictable makes them dead." They pressed deeper into the service veins of the array, the distant firefight echoing like thunder through the walls. The tactical node Yarek pulled from the corpse flickered again, projecting a ghostly map. Symbols marked breach points, squads advancing in tight synchrony, corridors collapsing behind them. But all the lines funneled toward a single destination. Rin squinted at the map. That's the core? No. Jarek's eyes hardened. Deeper. They're heading for the archives. The archives? Rin's voice cracked. Those are sealed, restricted to Blackline, Jarek finished. His tone was sharp, final, as if the word itself cut the air. Rin froze. He had heard whispers of Blackline, always in hushed tones from officers who should have known better. Rumors of a doctrine too dangerous to teach, locked away beneath layers of security. No cadet should even know the name. Yet Yarek had said it without hesitation, like he'd read it from memory. Before Rin could speak, the overheads buzzed. A cool, measured voice filled the shaft, vibrating through steel and bone. Unauthorized personnel detected. Identify yourself immediately. Yarek's jaw clenched. Mother Glass. The Sentinel AI's voice echoed again. Cadet Thorne, you lack clearance for this sector. Return to your designated station or face disciplinary lockdown. Rin swallowed hard. She knows your name. She knows everyone's name, Jarek said flatly. His eyes stayed on the map, ignoring the AI's warnings. But she doesn't know the war that's coming. The voice sharpened. Blackline data is sealed. Access denied. You are out of compliance. Jarek slammed the tactical node into the wall port, overriding the feed. Sparks leapt. Enemy icons flared brighter, closing on the archive's vault doors. He didn't flinch. Out of compliance doesn't matter if we're already dead. The shaft trembled as another explosion shook the array. Rin steadied himself against the wall, fear gnawing at his gut. Yarek, how do you know all this? How do you even know the word Blackline? Jarek's eyes stayed fixed on the glowing map, the blade glinting in his other hand. He didn't answer. A long silence stretched before he finally spoke, voice low enough to chill. Because Blackline wasn't built for peace. It was built for nights like this. The tactical map bled red with advancing enemy icons. Every corridor sealed behind them, every bulkhead falling in sequence. Jarek closed the display and pushed forward, Rin on his heels. The service shaft opened into a secondary hangar, and they weren't alone. Dozens of cadets huddled behind overturned crates, their faces pale beneath polished visors. Some clutched rifles, but hadn't fired a shot. Their training manuals hadn't prepared them for the suddenness of real war. The moment Yarek stepped into view, the jeers returned. Look who crawled out of the vents, one muttered, still dragging that toy knife. Back to your station, Thorne, another snapped. Command will handle this. Jarek didn't slow. He climbed atop a crate, blade glinting in the dim red lights. His voice carried over the chaos, sharp as steel. Command isn't coming. You hear me? The archives are their target. If they break through, this array won't matter. Neither will you. Murmurs spread. A few laughed nervously, shaking their heads. But Yarek's gaze cut through them, cold and unflinching. You think doctrine will save you? Their doctrine is better, stronger, faster. You'll be dead before you finish reciting your clearance codes. A crystalline cadet rose, voice trembling. Then what? What do you suggest? We just throw ourselves at them? Yarek lifted the blade, slow and deliberate. Follow me, or die with your manuals in your hands. The hangar fell silent. For the first time, the mockery was gone. Faces shifted, uncertain but listening. Even those who had laughed at him earlier now watched as if they weren't sure whether he was a fool or a prophet. Rin stepped forward, voice steady. I've seen him fight. He's not guessing. He knows. That broke the hesitation. One cadet shouldered her rifle. Another rose, nodding grimly. And then a third. A tide began to turn. Yarek looked over them, his expression unreadable. Not triumph, not relief, only calculation. Then we move now. Every second we waste, the archives bleed closer to breach. He leapt down from the crate, landing without sound. The cadets followed, weapons clutched tight. What had started as ridicule had shifted into something else entirely. They weren't mocking him anymore. They were trusting him. The vault doors of the Blackline Archives loomed like the gates of a cathedral, towering slabs of reinforced alloy streaked with warning glyphs. The air hummed with the charge of enemy breaching drills, sparks raining across the deck as soldiers in black armor pressed closer. Yarrick advanced through the gloom, cadets fanning out behind him. Their breathing was loud in their helmets, their rifles trembling in unsteady hands. None of them had ever seen a battlefield like this. "Positions," Yarrick ordered. His tone was flat, precise, leaving no room for hesitation. They obeyed without question. Rin crouched beside him. "We can't hold them. Not here. Not with this." Yarrick's eyes never left the advancing line. "Then we make them bleed faster than they expect." The first charge struck the doors, a concussive boom that rattled the entire chamber. Shards of metal screamed free. The cadets flinched, some nearly breaking ranks, until Yarrick stepped forward, blade in hand. The soldiers surged through the breach, dozens, dark visors gleaming, plasma rifles igniting. Yarrick moved first. He slipped through the storm of gunfire like water, cutting low and driving steel into a soldier's abdomen seam. The armor resisted for an instant, then split. The enemy collapsed. "Fire!" Yarrick's command cracked like thunder. Cadets unleashed their rifles, plasma bolts burning into the breach. Chaos exploded. Screams, the stench of scorched armor, smoke thick enough to choke. Another soldier charged Yarrick with a powered spear. Yarrick pivoted, letting the blade skim past before driving his own weapon through the weak point beneath the helmet. One strike, one kill. He tore the spear free and hurled it into the next attacker. Rin fought at his side, every motion raw but desperate. The cadets held their line, firing in disciplined bursts now, following Yarrick's shouted cues. Each time panic threatened, his voice cut through the storm. "Hold steady, aim low, they bleed like we do." More soldiers fell, their doctrine unraveling against tactics no manual had prepared them for. The archives became a slaughterhouse, steel and plasma mingling, screams echoing under vaulted ceilings. And yet Yarrick kept moving, every strike as precise as the last. Calm in the chaos, cold in the fire. His blade, mocked hours before, was now the point on which the entire battle balanced. But the enemy didn't falter easily. For every squad they broke, another pressed forward. Breach charges grew louder. The vault doors groaned under relentless assault. Rin gasped between bursts of fire. "We can't hold forever." Yarrick's eyes burned, unblinking, his blade dripping. "We don't hold forever. We hold long enough." The chamber shook as another charge detonated, the glow of the breach spilling across their faces. And in that flickering light, even the most arrogant cadets understood. Without Yarrick Thorne, they were already dead. The battle raged until the chamber was unrecognizable. Smoke choked the air, walls pitted with plasma burns. The vault doors trembling under ceaseless assault. Cadets fought with desperation now, their faces streaked with sweat, their voices raw with shouted commands. Yarrick stood at the center, his blade carving arcs of steel through armor seams. Every strike clean, efficient, merciless. But even steel has limits. A soldier's plasma bolt struck him across the ribs. His body jerked, the impact throwing him against the bulkhead. The scent of burned fabric filled the air. "Yarrick!" Rin's shout was frantic. He cut down an enemy charging toward him, then scrambled to Yarrick's side. Yarrick pushed himself up, blood running beneath scorched armor. His hand trembled, but the blade never left his grip. "I'm not done." The enemy pressed harder, sensing weakness. Their formations surged, shields flaring bright as they advanced toward the cadets' faltering line. Panic threatened to break the fragile courage Yarrick had built. He staggered forward, forcing his voice into the chaos. "Steady!" His tone cracked, but still carried authority. "Aim for the gaps. Make every shot count." The cadets rallied, voices hoarse, firing in unison. Several enemies fell, but more kept coming. Yarrick caught a soldier by the wrist, wrenched the plasma rifle aside, and drove his blade upward through the chest plate. The force of the strike sent agony tearing through his injured ribs. He gasped, but refused to fall. Rin saw it then. Scars beneath Yarek's torn armor, layers of old wounds that no cadet should carry, faded burns, healed punctures. He wasn't a boy learning war. He was a man who had already survived it. The realization hit like thunder. Yarek Thorn wasn't extraordinary by accident. He was forged by battles no one in this room could even imagine. Another blast rocked the chamber. The vault doors groaned but held. Reinforcements would come eventually, but by then Yarek had already done the impossible. He dragged the blade free, blood dripping from both steel and skin. His voice dropped to a whisper, meant for no one but himself. Not today. By the time reinforcements stormed the chamber, the fighting was already finished. Smoke curled from broken rifles. Enemy bodies littered the archive floor, armor split open by plasma burns and steel wounds alike. The cadets stood silent, weapons limp at their sides, eyes fixed on the man who had led them through hell. Yarek Thorn leaned against the scorched vault doors, his blade slick with blood. His chest plate was cracked, his body trembling, but his eyes were steady. And the soldiers parted as Admiral Tolan Reese entered, his uniform unmarked, his expression unreadable. He took in the wreckage with one slow sweep of his gaze, then fixed it on Yarek. "Cadet Thorn," the Admiral said. His voice was sharp, clipped. "You will explain how a first-year recruit not only accessed restricted sectors, but issued Blackline commands under fire." Rin stepped forward instinctively. "Sir, if not for him, we'd all be dead. He knew things none of us—" "Silence," Reese snapped. His gaze never left Yarek. "Where did you learn Blackline?" The hangar fell utterly quiet. Every cadet leaned forward, waiting for the answer, desperate to pierce the mystery. Yarek straightened, blood running from his ribs, his blade still in his hand. He met the Admiral's eyes without fear. "I learned it where manuals don't reach," he said. His voice was low, gravel thick. "Where scars teach more than classrooms ever could." Reese's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Yarek could hear. "You aren't supposed to exist." Yarek gave no answer. He simply wiped the blade clean, the scrape of steel on fabric echoing in the silence. For the cadets who had mocked him only hours before, the question burned hotter than ever. Who exactly was Yarek Thorn? The Blackline Archives stood sealed once more, their towering doors scarred but unbroken. The chamber reeked of ozone and blood, silence falling heavy after the storm. Cadets moved quietly now, gathering the wounded, dragging enemy bodies aside. None of them dared meet Yarek's eyes for long. Hours earlier they had mocked him, sneered at the steel in his hands. Now they couldn't look at the blade without remembering the sound it made, splitting through armored flesh. Respect lingered in the air, but beneath it was fear. Rin Calder stayed closest, his gaze still unsettled. He had fought beside Yarek, seen the scars under the armor, felt the weight of secrets too deep for any cadet to carry. He wanted answers, but he knew better than to ask. The hangar doors hissed open. Admiral Reese returned with a sealed case tucked beneath one arm. He paused before Yarek, his eyes sharp. Without a word, he handed over the case. Yarek's fingers traced the lock. It snapped open with a soft hiss, revealing a single data cube, black, faceted, glowing faintly at its core. Across its surface, burned in white lettering, were two words: Blackline Protocol. The Admiral's voice was flat, almost cold. "Orders, classified. You'll find no record of them anywhere else." Yarek closed the case, slid the blade across his back, and gave a single nod. Around him, whispers rose among the cadets. Some called him Savior. Others called him something far more dangerous. Yarek Thorn walked away without a word, leaving the chamber heavy with questions. The relic blade hung at his side, steel catching the last flicker of light. And for the first time, the cadets wondered if they had just followed a man, or something forged for a war none of them were ready to face.